Greetings, fellow demon slayers. I'd like to voice a defense of monster scaling in Diablo 4. As I've been consuming quite a bit of D4 content since the beta began, one of the criticisms I've heard a few times has been regarding the system of monster scaling with you as you level up. So the majority of all the monsters in the game are going to be the same level when you are fighting them. The issue that people have with this, the only issue as far as I've seen, is that each time you level, you're going to feel slightly less powerful that way. Before I get into the pros and cons of the current system, I'll start by saying that I didn't actually experience this general bad feeling during my rather extensive playtime with the beta. I leveled 4 of the classes to 25, the Bard being the only class I didn't max out. I played him up to around level 20 or so. So to be honest, I was a bit of a loss when I started to see this issue being raised by multiple people. Personally, I never really felt like I was getting weaker. My experience during the beta was flat stretches of no real discernible change in power, with noticeable spikes in increased power. These spikes in power would come by multiple ways. Could be by unlocking a new ability, either by way of a skill tree or by equipping an item that has plus rank to a skill, in which you then have access to that skill, just like in Diablo 2. Equipping a new powerful legendary affix, which can be obtained multiple ways as well, either by getting lucky with an item drop or by unlocking the affix with the Codex of Power. Unlocking your class-specific system is another spike in power. These are just some of the biggest increases that I felt. As far as the stretches where I felt no change in power, I would attribute that to the smaller increases that you obtain while leveling, which offset the dynamic of the monsters scaling up with you. Things like minor gear upgrades or a skill point put into a modifier instead of an actual new skill. Upgrading your potion is a little boost to your survivability. I believe this happens every 5 levels you can do that. There are also the other crafting NPCs. This is something that I didn't really test much myself. I messed with them a bit once I reached max level, but while leveling I really didn't touch them at all. The blacksmith, he can straight up increase the item level of your gear, increasing the stats across the board. The gem dude can upgrade gems, even add sockets to your gear. I'm not really sure which point that becomes available, but heck, a lot of the time when I obtained a piece of gear with sockets already in the item, I didn't even bother to put gems in it. What I'm getting at is I didn't go out of my way to min-max during leveling. I just went with the flow. And if someone is getting a bad vibe from the monster scaling, there are quite a few ways to offset that small bit of scaling each time you level. Some of these offsets will come naturally as you play, like they did for me. Others, like the crafting, are optional little boosts in power that are available. And this is by no means an exhaustive list either. There's still the Renown system that provides small buffs in power. Paragon board opens up at 50, which most are assuming will be incremental power gains. I think you actually get 4 Paragon points per level. The glyphs used on the Paragon board may end up being rather large boost to power when they eventually start dropping, assuming they actually drop during the leveling process. Kriparian was one of the first people I saw who took issue with the monster scaling. He didn't really say what he would prefer instead, though, so the best I can do is assume he would prefer a system like Diablo 2 where the monster level is static, and it's just based on what act and difficulty you're playing on. Quinn69 was another creator who raised this issue in his D4 beta review, but again, he didn't elaborate on an alternative. So as I go over some of the pros and cons as I see them, I'll be comparing between the current scaling system in D4 and just a generic static monster level, such as Diablo 2 or WoW Classic. If there's a novel third option that I'm unaware of, please enlighten me in the comments below. Taking a step back, this got me thinking about how games in general should play out as you level. Should a game get easier or harder as you progress? While leveling, I 100% want an increasing challenge. I want monsters to hit harder. I want the bosses with an extra mechanic or two as I progress through the game. While I may actually be at my weakest character power at level 1, I certainly don't want it to feel that way. I don't want the first skeleton I come across to be the hardest challenge. I want the final boss to be the biggest challenge. I want to play a game that becomes progressively harder, not easier. That is until I finish the leveling grind and enter the endgame grind at least. Monster scaling is a plus in this regard. Next, let's talk about a feature that seems to be universally accepted as a positive, which is the non-linear option of the story. Basically, you can go do whatever you want. My understanding is once you complete the beginning tutorial quest line, which wraps up pretty early, I want to say about level 6 or 7, the first 3 zones are entirely open for exploration. This would not be possible with a traditional static level monster system. If I'm playing a new character in WoW Classic, I can't go to the Barrens at level 5. With a D4 scaling type system, I could most likely do that if I wanted to. I'm not sure how you could pull off a non-linear experience without monsters scaling to your level. Again, if there is a game out there, which there very well may be, I'm pretty much a mono gamer, so I don't try many new games. I'd love to hear about it. Next up, what might be the upside of monster scaling for the biggest chunk of people is being able to group up and play with someone who is much higher level or lower level. I actually tested this a bit in the beta, and it worked rather seamlessly. I played the majority of the beta in a 2-person co-op group, and most of the time we were playing, real similar characters as far as our level. But we did briefly play a couple of rogues who were at least 10 levels apart. And I'd say it felt pretty much identical to when we were playing characters that were real close in level. The only time it may have felt a little off to me was during the boss fights. It almost seemed like the scaling was weighted more towards the higher level during bosses, but we certainly could have just had some terrible single target specs, or could have been another reason. But assuming the scaling is equal across the board, they did die a little slower is all. But a pro for static level monsters is being able to go back to a lower level zone if you run into a wall. I have a very hard time seeing this happen to many people in Diablo 4 though, unless the difficulty ramps up significantly after the beta content. Plus there's the world tier system that players can knock down to a lower difficulty if they need. Generally the feedback I have seen is that the game isn't hard enough, even on veteran difficulty right out of the gate. Personally, I never even tried the lowest difficulty setting. If anything, I would have preferred a harder setting from the start. So in this regard, if you are playing on the lowest difficulty setting and somehow ran into a wall due to the monster scaling, I don't know, you may just want to try a new game. And aside to this point, if you go back to a lower zone, you will most likely be getting loot drops that are lower level as well. Whereas with the benefit of monster scaling, you're almost always going to be getting eye level gear drops that are higher than your current gear equipped. So just in general, monster scaling is a benefit here. When you level up, you don't have to choose between finishing up a current zone or moving on to a higher zone so you can acquire higher item drops. The higher level zone with better drops just came to you. Next benefit to monster scaling, all content from the entire game is relevant at endgame. For me personally, this is probably the biggest upside. You aren't limited to farming only Act 5 or solely bosses from earlier acts, etc. This is something that could probably be addressed fairly easily in a static level monster system. Say once you finish the campaign, then all monsters scale to your level. Perhaps there's some kind of hybrid system in the middle that would be ideal. So in the end, I'm not trying to argue that the monster scaling system in D4 is perfect and that it shouldn't be changed in any way, but for my money, it's clearly superior to a traditional static level monster system. I believe all the content creators I've seen raise this topic as a negative have also expressed the same feeling that I have had, which is the game being, if anything, too easy and not too hard, which strikes me as somewhat contradictory. But anyway, I think I've gone long enough for this single topic. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.